relationship between the Industrial Revolution and imperialism is very important in that without one, you cannot have the other. It all starts with Industrial Revolution started in a country. They start to produce goods that were cheaper, which in turn helps the economy of the country. Well, since the goods were so low in price, the people had a greater demand for them. So the countries would go and conquer other countries in order to gain resources to sustain the way of life back in their own country.
Motivations for imperialism was based off economics, politics, and culture. Europeans felt like they always needed to conquer and cultivate the world and convert everyone in their path to Christianity. There was a need for raw materials that were not domestically available, and there were plenty of raw materials in Africa, proving that only the strongest nations survive and only the strongest nations have colonies in Africa. Everyone at this time wanted to show off their empires and their military forces. Everyone, including in nationalism, made other countries compete against each other to build empires for more power. In their eyes, the more land you owned, the better off you were, and the more colonies you had, the more prestige you gained. Europeans wanted to westernize the people in the colonies they conquered. Another motivation for imperialism is that European business owners wanted to look for new opportunities in Asia and India, and European industrialization created a demand for raw materials.
The British rule over India changed the course of history in India. The British came to India during the early 17th century. The British East India Trading Company was established in India to break the Dutch monopoly over spice trade. The East India Trading Company increased its powers, started to control the country. The entire Indian subcontinent came under the British rule. Mid-19th century, the British created railways, telegraph, and postal services in India. The new aspects increased communication through the country. The British passed acts and their policies were disliked by Indians, resulting in a revolt. As time progressed, the control of India by the British East India Trading Company increased until the Indians had enough of another country controlling them and making their decisions. The British ruled for over 200 years until 1947.
The Scramble for Africa was also known as the Race for Africa. It was a process of colonization of African territory by European powers during the new imperialism period. Before the Scramble for Africa, at the beginning of the 1880s, only a small part of Africa was under European rule. There were several factors for the reason of the Scramble of Africa, but most of these had to do with events in Europe rather than Africa. These were the end of the slave trade and exploration into new places. Other reasons were politics and military innovations. After the creation of a unified Germany and Italy, there was no room left for Europe to expand, so Europe had to go to Africa using two innovations that gave Europe a massive advantage. They restricted the sale of the new weaponry to Africa, maintaining military superiority. Within just 20 years, Africa had changed, with only Liberia and Ethiopia remaining free of European control. Finally, Europeans set the rules for dividing up the continent. The Berlin Conference of 1884 laid down the ground rules for further partitioning of Africa.
King Leopold II of Belgium was a man of great charm, intelligence, fearlessness, and greed. He was very vocal about how unhappy he was with inheriting the throne of a small country at a time where European kings were rapidly losing power to elected parliaments. Leopold had always wanted a colonial empire, and he knew the British explorer Henry Morton Stanley was somebody who can help him do just that. At the time, the Belgian cabinet was not interested in acquiring colonies, but Leopold did not care. He would acquire his own. In 1879, Stanley went down to the Congo and persuaded hundreds of illiterate African chiefs to sign treaties that basically gave all their land to the king. At the conference in Berlin, otherwise known as the Berlin Conference, he proclaimed the existence of this new independent Du Congo, or as it was known as the English, the Congo Free State. Equipped with automatic rifles, cannons, and machine guns, the king's 19,000-man army went down to the Congo and took control of a vast territory by killing Africans who only had spears or poorly made muskets to protect themselves. Under Leopold II's administration, the Congo Free State became one of the greatest international scandals of the early 20th century.
During the 19th century in South Africa, many conflicts between the Europeans and the natives occurred. It all started in 1811 when the Europeans invaded the lands of the Fish River. This sparked the Africans to fight back for their lands. Their efforts were unsuccessful and they had to retreat far from their original homelands. The Africans were not given back their lands until 1836. Another huge conflict in South Africa in the 19th century was the idea of having slaves. According to the Europeans, slaves were vital to the survival of the crops, but unfortunately for South Africans, the rest of Europe was reforming and giving slaves freedom. This devastated the slave owners and actually made many lose their land and crops.